So Arno, I really like this framework, the E.C.H.O framework. So let's move along on that. Experimentation. Talk a little bit about that. It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, it's kind of a tricky one, but because with experimentation kind of comes failure. So depending on, well, not necessarily, but at least tolerance for failure.
Right.
But what I like about incorporating the experimentation part, the iterative process of design thinking within knowledge management programs, is the fact that you may think big, but you start small, and you start and you figure out what works, and you figure out, and if it works, fine, you can scale it up. If it doesn't, then you learn, you move on. Whereas a lot of times KM programs are very linear. There's a KM strategy and then linear milestones, and you move from one to the next, and depending on the organization, you can deviate or not at all. So what I really like is, for example, if you want to test something in communities, take a subset of people within the community, see if it works. If it fails, it's no big deal, but you've learned. And if it works, you expand it to the larger community. So, but it's very tricky when it comes to the failure part, because it's hard to explain to managers or executives that there's a chance that this won't work.
It's not going to work, right?
They often want kind of security, or they have the confidence that it'll work. And but I do think that iterative process.
Yeah.
And it probably also it'll help us get to results much quicker.
Yeah.
Because you know what works, and instead of doing a program for a year, and then at the end figure out that no one's actually using whatever you
especially now when things are so technologically complex and the problems are so complex, and so when you put all the solutions together, there's impossible that you're going to get it right the first time. So being able to have a philosophy of, we're not going to get it right the first time, it's going to take a while to get it right, but we'll get it right, and knowing how to get it right. Yeah. Is a really important thing. So I can see that for sure.
No, definitely. And there was one project you were also involved in. It was a huge learning event at the World Bank, which may even be the biggest internal learning event ever done at the World Bank. I mean, someone has yet to disprove that. But we organized. We had about 250 sessions, individual sessions, over about a 3-day period. It was huge. 400 speakers. I mean, just the army of volunteers was already pretty vast. But that was, in a sense, it was experimenting, because we were doing this huge event, organizing it at a time when the institution was changing. There were a lot of changing. There was a lot of movement, and on the other hand, we also said we want to make sure we do it in a way that makes knowledge stick, so that people actually learn something, walk away with it, and implement it in their work. And we had come up with 10 different learning formats. Some were very obvious, like TED Talks. Some we like BBC Hard Talks. We did a Wikithon. So some were not necessarily obvious, but they were known successful. Yeah. And others we created based on what we knew our audience would like. And we kind of adapted it, and so there was quite some experimentation in there, not only in terms of scale, but also in terms of specific delivery modules.
Did you have any failures?
Yeah, there was. There were failures. Like I said, there were 10 formats, and definitely not all of them worked very well. I'll give you one example, which we called Experts on Call, and basically what we thought of was. So imagine you go to a huge conference and there's a great speaker, and after when he's done, you go up to the podium and you ask him like the 1 or 2 questions that are burning in your mind. And we said, why don't we replicate those few minutes where you talk one-on-one? So we called it Experts on Call, and all staff could basically sign up online for 15-minute slots, 15 minutes. And those would be like one-on-one sessions with the experts, where they could ask their questions, their burning questions, and then leave. But logistically, it was a nightmare, because you can imagine that, first of all, no one had done this format before. Yeah. So people showed up late, which they often do, but then 15 minutes. If you're 5 minutes late,
yes,
that's a lot.
Third of the time, right?
Or the expert and the person he was talking to were so engaged that they ran over time, and the next person couldn't be there, and so it became a logistical mess. What was very interesting, though, is that at a certain point, the experts, and there were 8 in parallel, so there were 8 sessions and then 15 minutes sequentially. In the end, the experts said, people can just stay seated. And the next one who has a 50, they can just join the group. So in the end, there were like 8 parallel group sessions, which worked out very well. People were very enthusiastic about them. But if you ask me about the concept of the format, it was a failure. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, it morphed into something that worked very well, and which was the interesting thing. So we kind of dared try this format.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we actually didn't adjust it. The experts and the end user actually made their own format in the end. Yeah. Which was done in the library, by the way, to my earlier one.
So what's interesting about is this failure turned into this success because you learned something new.
Yes.
So success in that sense, and then people got what they ultimately wanted that you couldn't predict the conditions that were going to happen, and it all worked out.
Yeah, and it also had a large change management component because, like I said, there were 250 sessions, but they were very small, which also meant we had to refuse a lot of people or reject a lot of people who signed up, who wanted to be there, but we did that based on profiles. So we said, if you're new to the organization, or so sometimes certain criteria were an advantage or a disadvantage to join a session, and that too, people weren't used to it. So they said, no, but I'm an expert in that. I have to be there. And we said, no, this is for people, for example, master classes. This is for people who've had at least 8 years of experience. Or we had other sessions that were called Meet the Manager, which were lunches with managers to discuss things with them. Those were for people who were just joined the institution. Mm-hmm. So it was also interesting that we had to reject people to join certain sessions for the greater benefit of having better sessions, but those people weren't used to, getting a no when they signed up. So it was a very interesting, also from that perspective.